All right. Thursday afternoon is not when we usually have a Panther-Lair show. We don't intend to go live for a Panther-Lair show on a Thursday afternoon. I have lots of things I do on a Thursday afternoon, lots of work things, lots of, just you have your regular pattern to the week, your regular schedule to the week. But when you're making your schedule at the beginning of the week, when you're making your pattern, your regular, approach to the week, the thing you don't have in mind, the thing you don't account for, the thing you don't plan for or expect is all hell breaking loose. And here we are on Thursday afternoon for a live Panther-Lair show on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, trying to figure out just what the hell is going on with Pitt basketball. And we'll cut the blue language. I won't swear anymore, but I don't know what you say right now about this Pitt basketball program. On Wednesday, when Xavier Johnson announced he was entering the transfer portal, it was big news. It was bad news. It was disappointing, unfortunate, and raised a lot of questions. And, when you put that on top of a 1-7 stretch, and John Hughley getting arrested, and you go back to Trey McGowan's transferring after last season, it raises a lot of questions. The recruiting stuff, too. You add in the recruiting problems. Or I should say that just the lack of recruiting activity, no commitments for the 2021 recruiting class, and seemingly not tied to many recruits, that we've been able to track down thus far. It raises a lot of eyebrows, and it makes you really concerned. If you've lost a 3-year starter at point guard, and he's decided to leave the program with 3 games left in the regular season plus the ACC tournament, and who knows whatever else might come, and that's concerning. It raises concerns. And it makes you wonder what's going on. Is Jeff Capel, does he have a problem? Because we can look at wins and losses. We can look at recruiting. We can look at this. We can look at that. And we can say, what's going on? I got a lot of question marks here. And then when you have Xavier Johnson leave the team before the season's even over, you say, boy, that's really weird. Boy, that's pretty concerning. I don't know what's going on here, but that doesn't look good. That doesn't look good. We'll have to see who comes back next year, what this roster is actually going to look like. We spent the last 24 hours talking about who's going to be the point guard for the last 3 games and who's going to be the point guard next season and what the roster is going to look like, how they're going to replace Xavier Johnson. That's what we spent the last 24 hours talking about until around, noon or so on Thursday when Toney is announced as leaving the basketball program. And now, I don't think there's any way to really spin it or sugarcoat it. Any way you look at it from the outside, this program, if not falling apart, it certainly has the air of a dumpster fire. And you know me. If you've watched this podcast before, listened to these podcasts, or watched these live streams, you read the 321 column, or you've interacted on Twitter, the message boards, or whatever, I wouldn't say I'm a benefit of the doubt guy, but I do, particularly with Jeff Capel in this Pitt basketball program, I take the long view. I look at what Capel inherited. I look at what he took over. I look at where the program was when Capel arrived. I look at what had happened to, and I hate this, I'm going to punch myself in the face afterward for saying this, but I look at what happened to the brand of Pitt basketball in the last, certainly the 2 years prior to Capel's arrival, and really, a downfall that started a couple years before Kevin Stallings' arrival and was cemented, during the Stallings years. Pitt basketball fell off the map nationally, was off the radar. It wasn't relevant for anyone on the national basketball, scene. The only time people talked about Pitt basketball was to make a joke about hiring Kevin Stallings, to make a joke about Kevin Stallings yelling at fans at Louisville. To comment on Cam Johnson not getting released to go to North Carolina or whatever. That was the only time anyone cared about Pitt basketball. And that was the situation Jeff Capel walked into, and I never wanted to forget that. I always wanted to make sure we kept that in mind when we evaluated the progress that Capel has made over the last 3 seasons and what Capel has done with the program. And I haven't completely gone away from that. I haven't given up on that thought. But you get to a point where one thing piles on top of another. the situation of where the program was when Capel arrived can explain a lot in terms of wins and losses, and explain a lot in terms of where the program has gone as far as recruiting, the types of players they've been able to bring in, and the success they've been able to have thus far under Capel. But what it can explain, or what I think is difficult for the Stallings era to be used as sort of a, I don't want to say a scapegoat, but to put the blame there, is when you start looking at how things have piled up in the last 11 months or so. From Trey McGowan's transferring, John Hughley getting arrested, Xavier Johnson going, Toney going, and then the recruiting issues where nothing seems to be happening. You see how these things pile up, and then you throw in this 1-7 stretch where the program went from one of its highest highs in years to experiencing some of its worst losses in years. I mean, the Notre Dame loss rivals some of Kevin Stallings', depending on your perspective, best or worst work at Pitt. And so you've got this pile of of negative developments, of bad outcomes stacking up. And you can't help but take a step back and say, what the hell is going on here? Why does this program have every outward appearance of falling apart? Now, there's, each of those situations we can look at. Each of those things I just talked about. McGowan's, Hughley, Johnson, Toney, those losses, the recruiting. We can look at each of those individually. We can put them, in isolation. And we can evaluate each one individually and say, okay, this is what happened here. This is why Trey McGowan's left. This is why Xavier Johnson chose to leave. This is why Toney chose to leave. This is what it means for the team. This was working. This wasn't working. This is the Hughley situation. This is the losing streak. This is how they played at Wake Forest. This is how they played against Notre Dame. This is how they played against Georgia Tech. This is why they couldn't close the deal against Virginia. This is why they don't have any commitments left. And we can look at each of those things in isolation and maybe find a rational explanation for each one of those situations. But when you stack them all up on top of each other, you can put your rationale, your rational explanations in one hand, and you can put this pile of developments in the other. And tell me which one fills up first, right? Isn't that the old joke? And so I think we're all left sitting here on Thursday, February 25th, 2021, less than 3 full years since Jeff Capel was hired, nearing the completion of 3 full seasons, as he seemingly works on completing his 3rd full recruiting class, and ask some real questions about where this program is and where it's gotten over the last 3 years. And I don't have, I'm not going to come out with a hot take. I'm not going to say you fire Jeff Capel. I'm not going to say you extend Jeff Capel. That decision is one that'll be made. Those decisions are ones that'll be made and have to be made with a lot more information than any of us are privy to. The insiders of all insiders out there don't have 100% of the information that Heather Lyke is going to take into consideration, and Heather Lyke is going to be able to collect and gather through her conversations with Jeff Capel and her evaluation of the program. But there's big questions right now, and it's hard to get away from them. It's hard to ignore them because you look at how these things have stacked up, and if nothing else, it's a bad look. And that I can't tell you the number of text messages I've gotten from multiple people talking about the PR of all of this. And we're on the live stream, so I'm going to get to some questions and comments. I know people are piling in here to have these conversations and jump in here. And I want to get to your questions and comments right now in a second. Let me say this. The PR thing means less to me than a lot of these other elements. Because, newsflash, whether it's Jeff Capel as the coach next year or you decide you're going to make a complete change and overhaul the program and bring in another coach, the fans aren't coming next year. The fans aren't going to show up. Even if they had allowed 12,500 attendance for next season, fans aren't going to show up. And I know that because fans didn't show up in Capel's first year either. So I'm less concerned about that. If you want to say, oh man, this is just killing the fan base for next year. The only thing that's going to revive the fan base is winning. Okay? Xavier Johnson and Toney, both of those guys were coming back next season, and Justin Champagnie, I don't know how many fans were going to show up until this team showed that they could win on a consistent basis. I'm far less interested in the PR side of this than I am in what's actually going on with this program and if there are bigger issues. If there is an issue with Jeff Capel and roster management, personnel management. That seems to be a thing we're talking about a lot. Whether it's the recruiting or whether it's just how you manage personalities. And there's part of me that looks at this situation and looks at Johnson and Toney and the fact that the word mutual or mutually agreed upon, those phrases were included in both press releases announcing Johnson and Toney departing. And I look at that and I say, maybe this wasn't just two guys trying to run away as fast as they can with both guns blazing behind them. That they just couldn't even play 3 more games for this guy or this program. Maybe this was a situation where all parties, on both sides of it, coaches and players, decided it's best to part ways right now and not play this out any longer. And there's a lot of stuff on the message boards. There's a lot of rumors, and I think there's probably some validity in them about issues in the locker room, issues in the culture. And that doesn't all fall off, fall on a plate other than Jeff Capel's. You're the head coach. Your job is to manage the culture. Your job is to manage the locker room, and ultimately he's got to take some responsibility for that. Some of the accountability falls on him. But you're also talking about dealing with 13 scholarship players and a few walk-ons. They're all, adults, college students, but over the age of 18. And they've all got, I guess, other than Will Jeffers, right? Have you guys heard he's young? They all have personalities, and there's something to be said for the fact that you can only manage to a certain extent. This is where it gets into that sort of gray area of what's on Capel, what's on the players, and was this ultimately a decision made to, with the best interests of the team in mind? And that very well may have been the case. That very well may be the case. I can't see Jeff Capel going out and saying on both occasions it was a mutual decision. If it wasn't, I don't think they would necessarily lie in those press releases. I think if those guys were just leaving, they would have just gone. And Pitt would have just announced that they're gone, or maybe not even put out a press release at all. So I don't know. I don't know what's going on with this program right now. They're down 2 of their 3 leading scorers, and the other guy, who is their leading scorer, who's their best player, is seriously talked about as an NBA prospect for next year. You could be coming into next season without Johnson, without Toney, without Champagnie. The big 3 that we've talked about all season, that you got to have all 3 of those guys going at once or else you're going to really struggle. Well, they are not going to have all 3 of those guys going at once for the next 3 games and whatever comes after that, because they're not going to have all 3 of those guys on the roster. Well, maybe they surprise us and it's this amazing, the roster gets gutted of 2 of its 3 stars and they, rise from the ashes and all this stuff. I don't know. Seems highly unlikely, but, what's the worst that can happen? They'll lose to Wake Forest. They'll lose to Notre Dame. They'll lose to Georgia Tech. Seems like it seems like they were able to lose to those guys with Johnson and Toney. See if they can lose without them. All right, comments and questions. People have a lot on their minds right now, without a doubt. And, there's a lot going on. Chris Bruno says he's in a work meeting right now. Yeah, I apologize. I mean, this is a Thursday afternoon. I realize that. And believe me, I did not expect to be sitting here doing a live stream podcast on a Thursday afternoon. So I apologize to everyone who's in, is working right now or trying to. Scrolling down. Yeah, Luca Carroll says this has really killed my production this week. You're right about that. It's changed things for sure. When you get those emails that come through that say, this player is leaving the program, it definitely changes your perspective on things, especially when it happens with 3 games left. And this is the thing I would say, I guess. And a few people have asked this question on Twitter and message boards. They said, they said it after Johnson and then after Toney. Hey, these guys are leaving with games left in the season. And these are 2 starters, guys playing tons of minutes, 2 of the 3 leading scorers. Is it safe to assume this is about something other than on-court matters? And I don't think there's any question about it. Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at this, mutually agreed upon departures for 2 guys who were playing 35 minutes a night, 38 minutes a night, 33 minutes a night, whatever it is, 2 of the 3 leading scorers, and they leave with 3 games left. I mean, I can't draw any conclusion other than off-court issues, which is concerning. There's no question about it. It's concerning if you're in year 3 and you've got culture issues, which is what that amounts to. Locker room issues. That's a problem. Who knows? Maybe that resolves all the culture issues or the locker room issues, and they end up, it turns around on it turns around on the court. But I don't think there's any question these departures had a whole lot more to do with things off the court than on. Adam Brandt says, it was easy to see next season as a put-up or shut-up season for Jeff Capel. Did that just get accelerated to this offseason? So, yeah, that's a great question. I think, Adam, I think you're right that, next season there was going to be a lot of pressure on Jeff Capel to, at the very least, make the NCAA tournament. And if he failed to do that in year 4, then you could say he was on the hot seat in year 5. I don't know what impact this has now. I don't know how it changes that metric. Here's the big thing, and I'm going to write about this in the 321 column tomorrow, on Friday, I should say, in case you're listening to this podcast later in the week. Here's the big thing. Heather Lyke, this offseason, and maybe right now, has to have a series of conversations with Jeff Capel, asking the question I asked at the very top of this thing, what the hell is going on? And maybe these are conversations that have been ongoing. I'd like to think that your director of athletics, your athletic director, Heather Lyke, is, tuned in enough to her head men's basketball coach, one of your 2 premier programs, is tuned in enough with him, has regular conversations with him to have an idea of what's going on in the locker room, what's going on in the culture. Whether she is or isn't, she needs to be having those conversations now, and she needs to have those conversations in the offseason. There has to be an explanation of what happened here, both on the court with the collapse after the Duke game, and then what has happened off the court throughout the course of February, leading to these 2 transfers. And then she needs an explanation that is satisfactory. Jeff Capel has to sell Heather Lyke on why this has happened, what it means for the program, and how he's going to make sure it doesn't happen again, how he's going to fix the culture of this program, which seems to have an issue when 2 of your leading guys are transferring. And then that will determine what kind of position Capel's in for next season. I don't see Pitt firing Jeff Capel this offseason. I would be surprised if that happened. That's just me sitting here on a Thursday afternoon trying to process all this news, trying to write tomorrow's 321 column, trying to get ready for a live stream, and texting with, hundreds, not hundreds, but texting with tons of people, getting texts coming in right now, talking about all kinds of stuff. It's, but as I sit here, I can't see them firing him. He might resign. I don't know if that would happen or not. I shouldn't even suggest that. Chris Pitt said he's going to resign. I'm not saying he's going to resign. I don't see Pitt firing him. But if there was going to be pressure on him in year 5, if he failed to make the tournament in year 4, then yes, Adam, to your question, maybe it does accelerate the pressure for year 4, which would be kind of funny because, you would presumably be putting more pressure on Jeff Capel to make the NCAA tournament without some of his best players, guys like Xavier Johnson and Toney, potentially, potentially even Justin Champagnie if he decides to go to the NBA. But I think it comes down to what Capel is able to explain to Heather Lyke and how she processes that information. All right, Colin Towell says, at some point, these altercations have to land on the coaching staff. This has happened the past 2 seasons, leading to 2 of our best players leaving. I don't know if Capel steps in and picks sides or what. This is the thing. If there are issues in the locker room, if there is, if there is a culture problem, that does ultimately fall on the coach. There's only so much you can do. These are young men. These are college students. They are adults. They're responsible for their own actions. They're responsible for their own relationships and responsible for their own interactions with each other and how they work together as a team. The coach's job is to make that work, and facilitate a good culture as much as possible. So you do have some accountability that falls on the coaches, but not all of it. Now, I mean, ultimately, when you make a decision on hiring or firing a coach, you are putting all of the accountability on them. But, you know, it is spread out. But you're right. It does fall on the coaches. And if you continue to have these issues year after year, you know, that's going to be on you. I will say this, Pitt has had now 3 high-profile transfers in the last 2 years. No disrespect to Ryan Murphy. I guess you could add in 4. There is part of me that says, well, that's college basketball right now. That's college athletics right now. You know, I mean, look at the guys. Watch the transfer portal on an annual, just in the last 2 months, 3 months. Guys are transferring all the time. There are going to be transfers in and out of almost every college basketball program every offseason. Pitt is going to have transfers in and out. These are 3 high-profile guys of McGowan's, Johnson, and Toney, and that changes it a little bit. Also, the timing of Johnson and Toney going in the middle of the season, or really the end of the season with just 3 games left. That makes it a little bit unique. Actually, it makes it a lot unique and adds another element that makes it more concerning. But it's not just having transfers. You're going to have transfers every year. That's something I think we all just have to accept and get used to, if you haven't already. Germazing, however you want to pronounce that, man, says, are we allowed to question Capel yet? If you say anything negative about him, people jump down your throat. Yeah, I don't know about that. I think some people, defend the coaching staff. I think some people are fans who say you have to give him more time. You have to keep giving him time. He inherited a massive rebuild. He took over a program that was at the very bottom, and you have to give him more time. And I think there's some truth to that. And there are also some fans who say you just got blown out by like 30 by Notre Dame, who is not good. What is that all about? You lost to St. Francis. What is that all about? You lost to Nicholls State. What is that all about? You lost 3 getting too worked up. You lost 3 high-profile players to transfer in the course of about 10 or 11 months. What is that all about? And I think there's plenty of people saying that right now. I think there are plenty of people who felt very comfortable criticizing Jeff Capel with some legitimate criticisms. Here's a hard thing, too. All right? Here's a hard thing. When Capel was hired, he seemed like a perfect candidate, right? And this, I think some people are still holding on. I'm still holding on to this to some extent when it comes to Capel. You could, when you wrote down the characteristics that define Jeff Capel as a coach, as you were looking at him as a coaching candidate, head coaching experience, playing experience in the ACC, deep roots in the ACC, a long history, an extended history with one of the premier programs in the country and one of the premier programs in the conference. It all just fit so perfectly. He was the ideal candidate. He really was. And in these 3 years, I think he's smart, he's candid. He makes statements that I think are important and relevant, and it's not about social issues or anything like that, but I think he's smart in the way he talks about the sport. I think he's smart in the way he, his comments on the landscape of college basketball. I think he's got a great perspective on the player's experience. I think Capel is really good at a lot of things, but he's got to get this under control. And maybe that's what he's done. Maybe with the departures of Johnson and Toney, maybe there were issues in the culture that could not be solved with those 2 guys still there. I don't know. Maybe that's the case, though. And maybe this is Capel solving those culture issues by having these transfers. And maybe we'll look back and say, well, he made the right move there. He finally managed the locker room the way it needed to be managed. But I do think, if we're as we inevitably we're going to take the big picture view on Jeff Capel here, and I understand why. I think some people do still think about what he represented and why he seemed like such a good hire at the time. Why I bought in for sure, and I think a lot of people did as well. Ryan Graham says, where are 5 to 6 recruits going to come from? I just can't believe this is happening. Yeah, and that's the thing, Ryan. When you look at it right now, I still have my paper from Tuesday night's podcast. We're less than 20 or 48 hours later. I still have my sheet here where I wrote out the roster, like who's going to be here, who's going to be gone. And at the time, on Tuesday night, it was like, okay, you're going to have 2 open scholarship spots. and it's Terrell Brown and Nike Sabande. Whether those guys go or whether they come back, their scholarships aren't going to count against the limit of 13. So you're going to have 2. Now, less than 48 hours later, you've got 2 more spots opened up. You're going to have 4 open scholarship spots for next year's roster. 0 committed recruits. And not a whole lot in the way of tying this staff and this program to any real prospects in the 2021 recruiting class. We always knew there were going to be transfers. Like I say, they're going to be transfers every year. Transfers in, transfers out. Transfers were going to take up some of the open spots. So you've got 4 spots. Let's say you bring in 2 transfers. Never mind what kind of transfers they can get, because obviously the history of transfers has been questionable. You know, I mean, marginal impact, although I think Ethiel Horton can be a really good player for Pitt. So you've got 4 open spots. Let's say you fill them with 2 transfers. You still need 2 recruits, 2 high school kids, and I'm not sure where you're going to get them. And I don't know if you want to go out and get 4 transfers. I mean, that might be what you have to do, but I don't know, even in 2021, if that's the best way to build a program. It seems dicey. It doesn't seem like a lot to build on. We'll have to see. We'll have to see what develops. Let's say. Pitt Bill says at some point accountability comes into play. That falls completely and squarely on Jeff Capel and his poor coaching. Add to that his total lack of quality recruiting and losing the players he gets. Well, as it relates to recruiting, I mean, no, they don't have anybody for this 2021 class, and that's a big issue. Like I say, I'm not going to deny that. I do think his recruiting has been, on the whole, if you add all of it together, has been pretty good. Okay, if you just look at the recruiting end of it, getting Toney, Johnson, and McGowan's was a good score when Capel had only been on the job for like a month or 2. Okay, that was good. Those guys are gone now. That era is over, and I understand that, and that's going to change the way we look at their recruitment. But I don't think you can deny that getting those 3 guys, you got McGowan's and Toney to reclassify, got Johnson after he got out of his letter of intent to Nebraska. Those were 3 good recruiting scores for Jeff Capel. The next year's class, his first full class, it wasn't great. Justin Champagny looks good in that class. Obviously, Koulibaly looks good in that class. But as a recruiting class, it wasn't a great class. But this last year's class, the guys who were freshmen, was a top 20 class, ranked in the top 3, I think, in the ACC, and was one of the highest rated recruiting classes Pitt has brought in years. Will Jeffress and John Hughley were 4-star prospects. Those were good recruits. That was recruiting success. Those were hits. Okay? Now, yeah, Will Jeffress is not ready to play. He's young. He's not ready to contribute in the ACC for 20 minutes, 25 minutes a night. Not yet. Yeah, maybe with the roster attrition that Pitt has experienced in the last 2 days, maybe he'll get more minutes. But he didn't come into the season ready to go. Okay? John Hughley, we know what happened there. All right? But those things don't change the recruitment, where Capel scored. He did well recruiting. Now, 2021 is a big issue, but I think on the whole, his recruiting has been pretty solid. Now, I mean, Pitt Bill, to your other point, I mean, accountability, like I say, yeah, Capel will have to own this. And I doubt he's going to get into specifics or details or air dirty laundry or call guys out for why they left the team or why he was okay with them leaving the team. I don't think he's going to do that, and I don't think he should. And so he's going to have to own it. He's going to have to wear the accountability for losing these 2 guys, for these 2 prominent players, 2 of the top 3 leading scorers on the team, leaving the team. That's going to be on him. He's not going to have a choice about that. Let's see. Sam Smallwood says, as much as I hated Stallings, he didn't have trouble getting players to come to Pitt, albeit half of them weren't ACC caliber. Capel can't even get one guy for 2021, and everyone else is fleeing. I mean, that's Sam, I disagree with you. Go back and look at Kevin Stallings, that giant recruiting class. Yeah, Marcus Carr and Parker Stewart are really good players. You did a pretty good job with Jared Wilson Frame as well. I don't think there's any question. But, Stallings didn't do a great job. And I think on the whole, if you compare the 2, I think Capel is still recruited a little bit better than Stallings did. It would have been nice if Capel could have held on to Marcus Carr, convinced him to stay. But I think Carr and a lot of those guys had already made their decision before Capel was even hired. just because they didn't like the way the Stallings firing was handled at Pitt. So Capel kind of walked into a losing situation there. But, we are experiencing some, I don't know if I would call it's kind of revisionist history with Kevin Stallings in the last month or two. The program is still in better shape now than it was when Stallings was here. I saw somebody on Twitter, I think yesterday, said, it's basically where it was, when Capel arrived, or maybe it's worse than when Capel arrived. I mean, man, they won 0 ACC games in Stallings' second season, right? Capel has done better than that every year. Even this year, 5 wins in the conference is better than 0 wins in the conference, right? Let's do the math here. It's not worse than it was when Capel arrived. It's better. We can debate how much better, and we can debate the stability, and we can debate the culture in the locker room and all those things, but it's still better than it was when Stallings was here. Let's not get too crazy. Bart says, I keep hearing that the players just don't like Jeff, and it seems to be playing out in front of my eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, hearing where? I guess there are rumors about it. And look, if the players were great with the coaches, then maybe they wouldn't transfer, right? I don't know. Sometimes you get into soap opera stuff and there's so many layers to it, and there's such a telephone game, and who are you talking to? And it's parents of the players, or it's friends of the players, or friends of the friends of the players, or friends of the parents of the players. Some of that stuff, like, the players don't like the coaches, or I don't know. For me, sometimes, if I can write it in an article, if I feel confident enough that it's solid enough that I can write it in an article, then okay, then I believe it 100%. When it starts getting into drama and rumors and innuendo and soap operas, I'm not saying those things aren't true. I just don't traffic in them all that much. Maybe I could get more traffic to my website if I did, but it's just not a choice. I just don't choose to do that. Let's see here. Michael B says this all starts and stops with Capel. He should be fired. He's making the program look as bad as Stallings. That's not true. Capel got a good headline when they beat Duke. I don't remember Stallings getting many good headlines at all. I think on the whole, the program is still in better shape than it was with Kevin Stallings. We can talk about the issues that Jeff Capel has. We can talk about the challenges facing the program. We can talk about where the program is falling short, or why it seems to be, from the outside looks like it's falling apart, why it looks like such a mess. We can talk about all those things, but we're not going to turn that around and make it into, it was better when Stallings was here, or it's as bad as it was when Stallings. It was a joke. Pitt basketball was a joke when Kevin Stallings was here. I mean, don't forget that. Don't pretend like it didn't happen. All right. Let's see here. Let's see. Just scroll down here. A lot of comments. Everybody's got something to say. Eric Bruno asked, Chris, I'm curious where Jeff goes from here. I think, where Jeff Capel goes from here, he gets ready for the game against Clemson on Sunday. I think that's what he does. I think he gets his lineup ready. He gets Femi Odikale ready to, start at point guard with Ethiel Horton, I'm guessing, right? Your starting lineup, you probably have, write it down so I can see it. Odikale, Horton, obviously Champagny and Coulibaly will start. And then you look for who could start at the 3. I mean, maybe they start 3 guards. You know what I mean? Maybe you roll Sabande out there, although I would think you would want him coming off the bench as a, probably your backup point guard, I would presume. So, I don't know who else you go with. Will Jeffers? Do you find out what Will Jeffers can do? How he can hang in the roster? Or hang in the lineup, playing playing full minutes? I don't know. I don't know what you do. I'm not sure how you build this lineup, but you got to find somebody to basically line up at the 3. And then, of course, I guess, that's going to be one of the interesting things to watch this season is what this lineup looks like for the next 3 games, and then whatever games come after that. Steven Gertz chiming in on the live stream. We appreciate to see you, Steve. He says, I did not expect to be writing departure breakdowns on Xavier Johnson and Audi's Toney. Yeah, Steven does a great job for us at Panther-Lair.com. Make sure you check out his stuff, Panther-Lair.com. Steve's film breakdowns are incredible. I'm giving a plug right now on the site because I know Steve is working on a film breakdown of what Xavier Johnson did and kind of the holes he's going to leave in the lineup. I think he's probably going to do the same kind of thing with Audi's Toney and break down how Femio to call it. I mean, Steve does incredible work. If you haven't checked out Steve's film breakdowns, you're missing out because you can learn a lot about basketball, about Pitt basketball, about these players, what Pitt is trying to do. My last plug on this, I always laugh when people say Capel doesn't really run any offensive sets. He just rolls the ball out there and lets him play, all this stuff. Read Steve's film breakdowns on Pitt's offense, and you'll see that there's an actual offense being run. They're actually running plays and trying to do things because Steve breaks it down. He does great stuff. Let's see here. Scroll down. Let's see. Just scrolling in here. A lot of people just kind of making the same comments, just concerned. And that's the hardest thing. As, I see a lot of comments, a lot of, questions just asking what's going on here. And I think, what's the best way to say this? I think we're looking at this program at this point in the season, in year 3, and wondering, maybe the big question is, where should the program be? Right? I think that's what we're all kind of wrestling with, is where should the program be at this point in year 3 of the Capel era? Should they be at a point where they're losing 7 out of 8 games? They've got 2 of their 3 leading scorers transferring with 3 games left to play. Should they be getting blown out by Notre Dame, losing on the road at Wake Forest? Where should they be at this point? And some of that is going to go back to what your expectations were when Capel was hired, where you thought they would be after 3 years. Some of that is going to go to how you elevated your expectations over the course of the last 3 years. I think certainly after the Duke game, we all pushed our expectations pretty high. And it has come crashing back down to earth with a furious thud. I don't think there's any question about that. But I don't know. I don't think anyone expected the program to be here in 3 years. You know what I mean? At the end of year 3, to be at the point it's at right now. But then again, there could be those things happening, behind closed doors in the locker room where, situations that were out of Capel's control, where ultimately the most he could do, the only way to really resolve the issue was to make changes to the roster, which is, what you've seen this week. Some significant changes to the roster. There is a point where, to be honest, curious to see what these guys do in the final 3 games. We've seen what they could do with Xavier Johnson and Audi's Toney, and I'm not going to say that, Johnson and Toney were the biggest problem for Pitt or anything like that. I don't think that. I don't believe that. I think the problems for Pitt over the last 8 games or, beyond that are much bigger than any one player or 2 players. I think there's a variety of problems. But, I'm curious. I'm curious to see what these guys, maybe they were. Maybe they did cause trouble on the court. Maybe, their personalities or the way they interacted with their teammates or the way they played, the way they conducted themselves on the court or how the offense had to operate with and around those guys. Maybe it opens things up. Maybe it changes things. I don't expect Pitt to run the table. I don't expect Pitt to go 3-0 in the final 3 games of the season. I, expect that it's probably going to be a tough stretch, with, I keep saying Clemson. I'm sorry. They're playing at NC State on Saturday. I just happened to glance at the schedule. I got all mixed up. Yeah, at NC State on Saturday. It's a game. Look, NC State, Wake Forest, Clemson, final 3 opponents. They're teams that Pitt could beat, but you'd have to think that their chances are significantly less without Johnson and Toney. But I don't know. Call it morbid curiosity if you will. But I'm curious to see what these guys can do. Curious to see what they can pull off. And I'm also very curious for the next time we talk to Jeff Capel. I'm guessing we won't talk to him again until after Saturday's game or Sunday's game at NC State. But curious to see what kind of comments he has. I'm guessing he will do like he did after the John Hughley situation and say he has nothing else to comment on. But I'm curious. Curious about a lot of things right now. Curious about a lot of. It's going to be, if nothing else, it's going to be interesting. It's not going to be boring watching this program over the next 3 games. It's not going to be boring watching this program over the next 3 months. Maybe I'll leave it at that. I do. I thank everybody who tuned in here on a Thursday afternoon. I know it's not a typical time for a live stream. I know everybody's got a lot going on. Justin E. has asked a few times, do you think this could lead to staff changes? I mean, that has been brought up at various points. I would have to think Jeff Capel sits down and evaluates his staff after the season, and if he considers part of his staff to be part of the source of some of these issues, if he looks at it and says, you know what, we could have done better in this area, we could have done better in that area. It is 3 years in. They haven't had a winning record. They haven't had really all that much consistent success. Maybe he does look at making some changes. I think we talked about that on Tuesday night's podcast as well. It wouldn't surprise me to see something change, just because that would sort of make sense. I mean, if you look at the way college athletics or most sports teams usually work, you go 3 years with the kind of success or the lack thereof that Pitt has had over the last 3 seasons, everybody doesn't always keep their jobs. And I'm not just talking about the head coach, but assistant coaches as well. So go to the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. These conversations are going to be going on all night long, I'm sure, on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. I appreciate everybody who tuned in for this emergency live stream. We'll put it out as a podcast as well, and so everybody who tuned in to that, I appreciate. Hey, I got to plug our friends at Home Field Apparel, right? HomeFieldApparel.com. You may be upset about the course of the Pitt basketball program, the direction of the Pitt basketball program, but that doesn't mean you have to wear lame T-shirts and sweatshirts. Go to HomeFieldApparel.com and get some great Pitt shirts and sweatshirts. Because look, even if you're unhappy with the way things are going right now, you're still a Pitt fan, right? You still support the program. You still want to wear cool shirts. I don't have a Home Field shirt on today because, like I said, I didn't plan on doing a live stream today. But HomeFieldApparel.com, they have great stuff, high-quality shirts. They look awesome, so go check that out. Of course, come to the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Unless anything else major happens, maybe the Peterson Event Center explodes or something like that, we're not going to have any more emergency podcasts. So Tuesday night will be our next live stream, 8:30 p.m., youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Tune in there to jump in the conversation. I'm sure we'll be talking more about everything going on. We'll talk about these things and I'm sure a lot else. I'm reading Josh Newark told me to cry in my Hawaii Rainbow Warriors sweatshirt. I don't think I'm crying, Josh, but you raised an interesting question. You said, are these departures the reason Pitt didn't schedule a game for this week? I don't know. Kind of get the impression that we're just sliding away from adding any games as the season is almost over. I think everybody's ready to be done with it. But, all right, we'll see what happens on Sunday. Pitt plays at NC State, 4 o'clock. Of course, Panther-Lair.com will be the place you'll want to go to check that out. And don't forget the Panthers Insider Show. I'm going to be talking about all this stuff on 93.7 The Fan Saturday morning at 8 a.m. So while you're here, make sure you subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Subscribe to our YouTube page, and then you can always get notification whenever we go live, so you won't miss any live stream podcast. Thanks again for everybody tuning in. We will talk to you on Tuesday night. Have a great rest of the week. Have a great weekend.